We really have only 2 goals remaining. We're shortening up a little bit because of what we've already done. We've got enough of summary material. Is to talk about 2 things. I'm going to do it in the following order. First, I'm going to ask us to talk about where do we go from here. What are your ideas about next steps? And then I'm going to do the goals exercise. I'm only doing it in that order so we get the next steps done, and then knowing the group, the goals thing could go crazy for a long time. So we will finish hard stop at 12 o'clock just to give everybody an opportunity to get out of here before the snow starts. And we do have lunch, so those of you who are willing to stay and continue discussions by lunch, we would, of course, welcome you. And around different tables, we might have different discussions with people. Where do we go from here? I wrote down a few things as we've gone along, and I'll use the same process, except I'll start from the right side to get this. We will not attempt to vote on this. What we'll do is to get ideas about where we go from here, put them into a document, and then through a sort of pseudo-Delphi, we'll get priorities out of that way, rather than trying to, and we'll open it up to all the people who attended yesterday as well as today, so that they have an opportunity to have a say. So that should help. Clearly, we need to do a number of things if we're going to go forward. I mean, one, you may say, we've done it. This has been great. We got some ideas on the table, and go forth and multiply. That's fine. One concept that came up, and I'm not putting these up as ideas, I'm asking you to have the ideas, is the concept of a community of practice on community of practice. And there's the idea of a group of people who want to see these ideas of various kinds, including social network theory and chaos theory and whatever it might be, to be disseminated into the community and to continue to influence. And secondly, to somehow facilitate or assist MRI in its sponsorship of these processes out in the community. So there could be sort of expert group, if you want, or interest group, whatever you want to call that. Obviously, we could have another session like this. We've had a lot of ideas. There'll be documents following this asking for your input. They'll be coalesced, and then a period of time from now, maybe it should be 6 months, maybe it should be the fall, whenever it is, we could have a meeting again and bring together what we've learned and from this and with what we've learned since then, additional thoughts, and do something similar but go to a greater depth. Maybe it should be shorter time, although I doubt that would work for most people. I think it's been made clear that there are some gaps that we lack. One is this evidence gap, like what should be done at various stages of the process that's been shown to work, or where we at least have some best practice about it, if not true evidence. We've got some experiential kind of evidence. There may be, and that missing evidence base may be very, very important. The other thing, that a technology thing, or not a technology, a methodology thing that I wondered if might be of value, related to hospitals. You're probably aware there's this e-health thing going on, where everybody is pushing toward the electronic health record, EHR. I claim it means empty health record. But the EHR is a sort of a goalpost, if you want, a vague one, but for the future. But the hospitals and physicians' practices are the sources of data. So if you don't have those guys with proper systems and engaged in the process, the EHR is going to be an empty health record because it's an agglomeration of all these data from the various levels of the health system. And if the data sources aren't there, you won't have the data. And what we did was something very interesting. We called it an e-health readiness survey of the hospitals and said, where are they against the standard that they need to be in order to participate in this electronic health record? And it's produced incredible information. Like, there are huge gaps, immense gaps, in what the hospitals are capable of doing right now in the dream of contributing to this electronic health record. Is there something like this in this community? Should there be a, I don't know, commercialization readiness type instrument developed and applied in a systematic way to detect who is ahead, behind, ready to participate? Or, you know, is there a value to that? Everyone wants to talk about inventories of who's doing what. That has some value. But where you are and what you're capable right now of doing may be more valuable. So that was another idea. I'm interested then in, as I said, I'm interested in your ideas of what, if anything, should we do next. I'll start. I'm going to go systematically to everybody. If you have nothing to say, you can pass. But what should we do next to you? You. And could you speak up?
Might have been Mark's idea about a community practice of commercialization, setting it up in that format. Probably a big core group for all of Ontario, but then mirroring with different particular regional information to the, I guess, the I kind of like that.
Just want to ask one question. Trudy, can you capture this as you go? Trying to do that. So we'll have some AIDS memoir for this thing. Okay. I'm just going to continue around the room in a systematic way.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. I think it's important to be operating at the regional level and at the provincial level. And I think one huge provincial level may be difficult to achieve, but I think where I sit and see all the connections, there could be 20, 30, 40, 50 sort of communities of practice out there operating. They don't know that they're a community of practice, but they're cross-cutting between the academic side, investor companies. And I think getting the right lens on what they're doing, I think, is useful. Promoting that they're there, because then other people may want to join that community of practice. So how do we build on what's already happening around networks across the province? And for me, it was like a real eye-opener around this lens, and try to get the word out there and identify. Maybe it's an inventory of what we think is out there already of sort of communities of practice in various areas of commercialization.
So the concept would be conceptualizing what's out there in these terms.
Yeah.
In terms of community practice.
Yeah.
And whether you do it systematically or not, that's also a big difference between a team and a community of practice. A team, you create a team. A community of practice, you almost discover it. You know, you already find a way it already exists in some form.
And if there's tools that can help them build the membership and build a broader community of practice, or even the international connections. Sorry, it's okay.
Well, I agree with what Brad said. I think there's really many communities of practice that already exist, but they're not accessible to all of the people around this table. I don't know the best way of pooling those so that they're both accessible to the people who play in those spaces now and to the people in this room. That's the number one challenge I see.
I guess I would describe myself as an open-minded skeptic on all of this, because I've seen a variety of e-tools used and evolve over the past to try to facilitate the essential part, which is the human interaction. And I still think that you need the face-to-face. The tech transfer aspect of commercialization has been called a contact sport, and it really is person-to-person contact. And I noted HN's comment this morning that the executives are probably the worst group to get involved in these sorts of things. Nonetheless, that's the group that I need to interact with to get my job done.
Electronically, yes, and on a laptop or
Yes. So again, for that group, which is a critical part of making the connections I need to make, it has to be on a human-to-human level. Once I've established it, then I can use some electronic tools. But if I haven't established that, there's a wall there. And the other point that I want to emphasize that was brought up again is I think we have a problem here of problem definition. The definition of the problem is solving commercialization in Ontario, I think, is way too broad. And we risk nibbling at the edges of minor problems when it's really macro issues, macro economic issues, macro taxation issues that have a much greater influence than what we do nibbling around the edges.
I would have to agree very strongly with all of what's been said so far. I view this as part, or I view some of my contribution, possible contribution, would be to in a sense, act as a networker of networks, and whether that be networks or community of practices, it doesn't matter, as long as the end result of my efforts is to bring people together for a common purpose.
So keep us focused on just where do we go from here? It could be individually, or it could be as a group or subgroups, whatever.
Individually, I mean, my group for NAO will be going and taking a look at some of the tools. But in terms of the community and where we go, I think there are already communities that are starting to form around this. The spanning communities between the RINs, the four-pillar stuff that's going on to just try and get everybody talking. So use those. They're there for this purpose. Use those to prototype, implementing softwares, or before huge amounts of money are thrown at the wall to see what stick. Use those to test the waters for this and help facilitate the growth of those that are already being established.
As the head of one of the RINs, I get pulled into a lot of different communities, and that's increasing almost every week. One community that I haven't seen really formed is really where my sectoral interest is, and that's really in the life science space. I echo Terry's comments with the commercialization in Ontario being too broad. My interests really are around life science commercialization, and particularly with regard to human health care. That's a community that I would be involved in. Any other community I would probably be a lurker in. And I think a lot of the issues that other sectors, particularly the IT sector, in terms of commercialization, are different than the life science community. And there are, I think there is a need for an Ontario perspective here, particularly because I see our competition being very acute from Quebec and BC. And our danger in terms of what is the disaster that we're facing is that Ontario, in the life science area, in terms of the whole ecosystem for commercialization, becomes largely irrelevant, and we lose a lot of companies. I think we are under the threat of losing companies daily right now in that space. And so that is our disaster, that's our threat, and that's what we need to rally around. We have a huge shortage of risk capital, and those are common features that maybe can bring that community together. So those are my perspectives.
I guess in terms of, can you hear me? Is this switched on? Okay. In terms of where to from here, I think that from my RIN perspective, we will continue to do the local activity because I think that's where the people interactions occur. My RIN is focused on both the biomedical aspects as well as bioproduct aspects, and so we have a huge agenda and trying to whittle it down to something we can actually do is a day-to-day challenge. But I think it's also important for us to be part of a larger provincial network, and I think that one of the things that I would see as a challenge ahead of us is communication and making sure that the relevant people are involved.
I guess I'd just echo that statement about sharing communication. I know even within our own organization here at Mars, we have trouble sharing, I guess, success stories and best practices, but I certainly encourage the sharing of that type of information. Because just from the events that we've had, like we had as an example, we had a shred credit event where Industry Canada put on, and they were hoping for 20 or 30 people to attend, and we had over 150 people registered for it. I mean, it far exceeded anybody's expectations. It showed there's this pent-up demand for information like that. We've had other events that didn't meet expectations as well. Some areas are overserved and underserved, and sometimes it's just having these events to identify what people need and then sharing that information, I think, would have value to you guys and then vice versa. So I guess just sharing best practices and information would be of value to us, certainly.
I guess I'd just like to reiterate some of the comments that are already made, and that is, as Terry said, we have to look at the really big problems. It's very easy to focus on small ones that each of us have, but the sort of big ones. And as Rob sort of highlighted are these sort of economic development ones, and the competition, whether it be in other provinces or globally for that matter. I mean, we've got Boston, we've got Seattle, we've got North Carolina, we've got all of California, and those are the people that are going to eat us up and gobble us out, and probably not only in life sciences, but probably in the other sectors too. I'm not obviously as familiar with them either, but those are the competition, and it's it's not tomorrow, but it's 5 years from now. But if you don't get started and you suddenly find out the last minute that that you're in trouble, it's way too late to solve your problems.
Similar comments. Depending on the community of practice that was formed, we would share best practices for commercialization as a member of the RINs. Specifically, that might be a great group to start up with, but as you get into the provincial level, it's much more difficult because you need to be able to have value and also people on enough of a segmented that they can contribute.
I guess all I'm going to say is that I'm receptive to the idea of using these e-tools to communicate, and then I think given a framework like the one that Mark presented, that this could be a starting place for a lot of different conversations and a good source of communication. So just general receptivity from my standpoint.
Just ask, maybe directly, are we a we? In other words, is there something, we are we. Is there something that has condensed out of this, and as you go around, you don't have to answer that necessarily, but come back. Have we, is there anything that comes out of this group itself, for example? Does anything emerge from this group of a subgroup that might be interested, or is this a means of disseminating? Just what we've heard, what we've learned, those kinds of things. Just as you go around, maybe that you can answer that as well.
My name is John again. Representing WGTSCC, Western Greater Toronto Conversion Center, which is a new member of RIN in Mississauga area, and also a Mississauga Technology Business Accelerator focus on commercialization. It's an opportunity for me to learn this community of practice thing, and I found this very, very useful. What to me, this community thing is just like a human being. That's what I learned is you give birth to a human being, it grows, it takes nutrition, regulate itself, and to have a healthy community, you have to have driving force. That's why what I found in my practice, because I'm specializing in technology commercialization in my organization. I'm new in this area, but I found a lot of challenge when you try to create a community, try to create an interest among industry and academia. I mean, it's very, very challenging because people have different objective perspective in their own agenda. And what I learned here today and yesterday, I was not here yesterday afternoon, but I learned a lot in the morning session and also the third session to use this concept to regulate this kind of activity. So that's what I think I need to use in the practice. We are focused on quite focused on regional activities, but we do have inter-regional connections. Like we had a lot of connectivity with York Biotech, but it's not. It's quite regional. I mean, again, it's very because we are very close to each other, and we do not have a lot of connections with far away members. That I think that is something we can think about how to make those connections. I mean, it's just like an interaction between human beings. You talk to your neighbors, but somebody far away there, you won't learn from them that it is, even though it's within the system, but you how to facilitate this kind of communication is interesting, I think.
Pastor Don.
I guess Dom, you've been married for a long time, so the question, are we makes a lot of guys cringe, right? But I guess...
Maybe because somebody married me?
Well, I'll have to
Yeah,
ask you that.
quiet. I got him to be quiet for a second there. It's good.
And again, I remind you, we're feeding live now. But I guess just to follow up on what I've been hearing, and I think it's appropriate that we're going to go to our expert panel table next. I think really what I see coming out of this is, if you're coming back to the question, are we a we? I think based on what our presenters were saying, you know, a key thing for any community is a compelling reason to come together, and it seems like we have people with different sort of compelling reasons, right? So perhaps the group that we have here, it's really a community of communities, and you know, the title of the workshop is really Concepts for Commercialization. So I think the common thing everybody has here are that they're involved with commercialization in one aspect or another, and the way I see it really in everything that I've been involved with, when there's something urgent and important, right, it pulls people together, like people will respond. However, having the community gives you that infrastructure so that you can respond quickly when something important does come along. And in the absence of that, we're floundering, because oftentimes, you know, it's like, hey, we got to do this tomorrow, or we got to do this like in a week from now, right? And we have no infrastructure in place. We have no community in place to go to for that. I think the real value I see coming out of this, and again, I'm just speaking as a guy sitting here in a red shirt and in sloppy clothing, that basically it's of value in itself to have this discussion at regular intervals. Everybody's busy, but having you know, it every 6 months or so keeps the community going, and having that general structure in place, if there are priorities that come along, right, we are able to go to our community, and certainly the electronic tools that Alex and Dwena demonstrated, you know, gives us the means, aside from the face-to-face, right, to have the community sustained without having everybody formally pulled together. Like we can do that, you know, quite easily, and that's the beauty, I think, of the internet and all the technology tools that we have available to us.
So this may be a community that has got a lot of lurkers in it, and to use Tien's...
well, yeah, I agree. Yeah. I think you have the core. We have to have a core, but then it's great to have all the lurkers out there, in the sense that the lurkers can be converted to core people, you know, as the needs arise, I guess, right, depending on what the priorities are that come along.
Okay.
Just to echo what Roger said, basically, I sit around here and I listen to all of you people, and there's obviously a lot of shared experiences here, things that you have in common, things that you could learn from each other. It'd be really nice to see all the RINs in here, not just the selection that's here. So the whole point, really, from my perspective, is how can we accelerate the forming of these communities? What can we do? How, and since it probably falls on the Ministry of Research and Innovation to make that happen, how can they sponsor it without interfering with it? Because that's always a great issue with government, is once they put some resources into it, they somehow have to feel they control it. And that's just the nature of the beast. It can't. But that's really what I would like to see. I would like to see that infrastructure start to build. It may take us a year, it may take us 2 years to make it happen. But by bringing people together, perhaps in meetings like this, with other kinds here, more VCs. We've got one angel here. We don't have any VCs, we don't have any lawyers that I know about, unless somebody's a lawyer sort of in disguise that they didn't tell us about it. We could then learn a lot more from each other, and you'd start to see these things formalized. And you would start to see the various categories of communities of practice involved as well. It will take time, but we could accelerate that process a lot, rather than just keeping our, you know, if you remember the old rule is the guy with the best Rolodex wins. If anybody remembers what a Rolodex is, it's basically a little card file with all those phone numbers on it. That's a community of practice.
By the way, I want to remind you, Apocrypha says there are two kinds of angels. I'm not so sure of him, you see.
Dom, I think it's been an extraordinarily interesting 2 days where one has learnt about the sociology of communities of practice, and there's some elements of these learnings that I think need to be passed on to those that want to engage in this exercise where it can be extraordinarily profitable. It seems to me that there are diversity of issues, diversity of players from what we've heard from everybody, and the issues are quite complex, and there's championship, it seems to me, for a variety of these issues as I've heard about this, and champions are necessary to move an agenda forward. I think what's compelling is that we need to have some process in order to strategically move forward. In a sense, one's got some ideas about what could be, but to move forward, you need to have some sort of strategic planning kind of group, whatever you want to call it. And I liked your idea that you expressed in opening this particular part of the session with regard to some community of practice group that's dealing with issues of community of practice. If one doesn't shepherd this and look after it and nurture these ideas, I don't think it's going to take off with quite the lightning speed that one would like. So it seems to me that the strategic movement forward is going to require some identification of key areas to move forward in. I heard some compelling points about what you should tackle first in light of the competitive areas that we're engaging in with other jurisdictions. There's also this issue of educating others who might come on board, and also enlightening people about those communities of practice that are actually working and are willing to engage. I think one has to kind of facilitate that kind of stuff. So what we do need is some kind of overview body to move forward. Now, I did hear from Brad the interest that exists obviously in his quarter within the ministry. So quite clearly there is some resourcing that could derive from that, just out of personal interest, quite apart from any dough that MRI might throw to this. But given that Bill Mantell made some comments about this and seemed to be supportive, it looks as though there could be some support deriving for this. But again, measuring some results as we go along would be a compelling way of giving evidence that this stuff is really working. So picking off some of the low-hanging fruit and really going for it as part of the strategy would, to my mind, be important. For people to be exposed to the kind of thing that I heard from our experts, our invited speakers, I mean, this is the stuff that will turn people on. So you have to repeat this kind of thing with a variety of audiences so as to get that engagement.
One observation is, I have a feeling that regardless of what the focus of your agenda in the last day and a half would have been, you'd still be at this point today. You'd be making comments like, we really need to keep the discussions going, we need to find ways to communicate and to share our learnings, and you can have almost any agenda, maybe not golf, but maybe yes, and have come to this part, because what you see observing is the seeds of that kind of community coming together who has an intention, regardless of whether you're clear about what you're each going to get from it or what collectively you'll get from it. So I think you've started something, and it has taken root, and at the very least people will go back with this lens to look at what they're doing and a greater readiness to connect back with the players who were here today. And I'll tell you, I've seen the same thing happen in community groups. I've seen the same thing happen in prisons. I've seen the same thing. It's a very human thing that when you bring people together, you start something. So that might be the seed that you carry on. It's that simple and that complex.
Very briefly, if we are a we, our interest and contribution would be to help put together a knowledge repository and to develop the tools that this community of practice to be or not to be may find necessary to develop a common knowledge in order to push forward the agenda. We have some experience in this, and I think that this can be an important, I don't want to use big words like critical, but an important step in making we indeed becoming a we.
I think you heard me already. Our invitation is open to consider some of these tools. I'm not sure if we have a we. I think we have multiple we's here. And I just hope for the best.
Multiple we's is wee-wee.
Yes, so in the whole sense of the word, of the term.
She got it. It took a while to translate that into Romanian or wherever.
I can definitely translate that in Romanian, but I can translate in other languages also.
I know, all of them.
We are very international and global, right?
That's right.
The world is my place. I just want to add a few comments. I'm not only working and utilizing the virtual tools for providing services to other groups or to do research. I'm also interested in social networks and virtual communities as, as beings. And I've learned a lot yesterday from the presentation from our invited speakers, and I want again to thank you all, and thank you, Dominic, for inviting us. And I'm looking forward to get feedback or comments, or if you need our help, support, if we can work together, let's try to do it. Good luck.
And just to make a final abuse of our panel, you've watched us as you've spoken, and you've seen us, and you can get a sense of the state we're in. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions about what we might do?
Well, I mean, for me, the first one is always kind of the question that I ask groups like this, and it's Cheryl's questions yesterday. Asking the people with the website, like, do you want to be in that business? Do you want to be in the business of developing communities? Because it's a business that's going to require developing capability. Because yesterday I was thinking, I exactly heard what you were thinking. Maybe Ontario needs a nice website to advertise Ontario as a place to invest. But it's a different business than building communities.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so if you confuse the two, you're going to be in trouble. Now, if MRI is really making a decision, we're going to be in the business of approaching the question of commercialization as a question of as a community of practice question, which is a broader question than just community of practice. It's really a learning system, a social learning system that includes networks and communities and so on. If we're going to approach that question that way, then I think this is what you were saying. We're going to have to develop a capability of how you support a system like that. And I think that model one, where you have the support, you have to have a support team. Organizations that have done that have built a support team. They have built a sponsorship council. And they have really created the organizing capability of supporting a system like this. And to me, it's going to be the important question to ask is that because in sociotech they have a really nice saying. They say if you start dancing with a bear, you don't decide when to stop. And so to me it's like that. If you're going to mess up with this, expect that thing to take over. Expect that thing and be ready to go to the end of the dance.
There's another version. It says, I caught a bear, but he doesn't let me go.
I think we need to Canadianize that, and it needs to be a beaver. But Deb.
I'm struck by what Brad was talking about during the break, about how many things already exist, and RINs, and it just seems to me you have foundation pieces here that rather than reinventing the wheel or starting from scratch, build on what you have and infuse some new ideas into that, try some tools, whatever, as in some ways it's a flatter approach to see what lands. But I've always found that if you work with your foundation and move from there, you're in a lot better place at the end.
Olaf.
Yeah, so I guess to end up, I think that even though we sort of come from somewhat different perspectives, I think the kind of main points that we would make are very similar, which is that what really matters are ultimately relationships, rather than, technology can be enabled, but what you really want to build are relationships between people, and that's what's going to get actually happen. Again, I find it useful to pick up the telephone to call people. I find it useful to do email, but ultimately, I'm only going to do that if I know the person on the first side. I don't, kind of make random phone calls to people just to see who might be at the other end.
We know we've got to get close to this guy. any other burning comments from the group or that you missed out on or thought of?
Just don't lose the momentum. Don't let it just sort of die and fizzle over the next 3-4 months. Sort of plotting and planning. Just sort of take this, run with it. Don't let it sort of just die.
Well, that's what I'm kind of hoping. That there's a message to the core group is that this is worth continuing. At least getting together again and seeing what we've done. Certainly, I think, disagree with me, please, if I'm wrong, that producing the material from this meeting will be of value because there'll be messages in it, and there may be derivatives from that, like, for example, key papers and so on. I've even thought of getting your book or key papers out to the community. I mean, it's not a huge expense, and someone might actually read it. Or having a seminar that introduces the concepts to the regional groups.
Just get those things done.
Dissemination, yeah. Okay. And let's see what happens with this.
Because you'll lose all the ideas.
Yeah. I think the most crucial thing, because we know how difficult it was to pull together as we keep calling it, the expert panel, and keep them interested, is going to be to develop the, I'll call it the unit that resources this. You said treat it as a business, and there need to be expertise, a support team. There needs to be a sponsoring council, and God knows this might be the nut for that to start it. But that is going to be the hard part, is actually convincing people that this isn't just some airy-fairy idea, that it has value and sufficient value to be have an organization, if you want, that deals with it. That's one of the biggest challenges.
We've already gotten, with some very limited resources, enough traction to have a couple meetings. We have a fishbowl over here that generated some great conversation. People throwing stuff up, Ramp Travel Wiki, but people are using it. And that's with very little resources. For the Canadian Venture Forum, we drew on that network, we tested it, and fully, well over half of the companies came from the people within that network. So I don't think it's actually going to take that much to get people engaged, because I think people know the problem. And I don't know what all these other organizations are doing or how we interact with them. So I think there's a pain point there. I don't think it's going to take that long to get it done.
Okay, could be.
When's the next fourth council, Brian?
Yeah, 23rd of February.
Any-
We'll be a fishbowl as well in the morning.
Send Brian or myself an email if you want to be.
If you want to be, this is a very open community. It's, you want to be involved in that ecosystem. This was the prototype to just sort of figure out how this is going to work and how we're going to work together. The wiki that I've been talking about is just so that I'm not presenting my slides of this is what my program does. That knowledge is there. You look at it. We can all access it. The goal of the meeting is to actually talk about something, whether it be use cases. As an entrepreneur walks into your room and says, where do I go for this, this, and this? Walking through those actual problems as opposed to just spouting information at each other. The wiki just
So we have a diversity here. One side says there need to be, you're talking about a more approach of putting resources and structuring it, but you're saying it'll merge. I mean, I don't know.
I think the two are
Like-
not incompatible. I think this is very important. These social artists I'm talking about, they are completely opportunistic. They see us. It's like the little leverage point. They see something like you were saying. There are already so many communities. Well, maybe we should talk to them. See, are you fine? Or maybe you need a budget for donuts for your meeting.
That was all we spent last time.
It's not a big initiative, but it takes a few people who really understand what they're doing, not to make it into a big initiative, but to make it this opportunistic building of a system that wants to find itself.
And your models have helped in focusing the sort of efforts that I'm putting out there, and everybody else that's joined in this thing. But again, you're talking about letting these things sprout organically. Well, it's already happening. Why add more to it? I mean,
sometimes a little bit of water here, a little bit of sunshine there.
That's exactly.
If you have the capability to understand how to help the system find itself, rather than import that message, lots of people want to talk.
Yeah, I would agree. I would totally echo his comments. I don't think this is a money secretariat, because the minute someone says they're going to take money out of the commercialization programs that exist to do this, I say no. Like, organically, there's tools that you said are inexpensive, cheap.
doesn't mean, because you're not using resources doesn't mean you can't use them. But if there's something that's really pressing and important enough, you don't wait for the resources to come, you make it happen. And then that's the reality of community, and that's why it does come up organically based on need. One last thing about the crisis, if you're really good, prevention, when you prevented something, you don't know because it doesn't happen. And so if you really are forward-thinking and proactive and having structures ready that really support initiative, isn't that the basic concept of innovation and commercialization, is to be really good at the stewards of it, to minimize the blocks and everything else. So practice your practice. And then maybe that provides a model for the actual process that you're wanting to
respond to disasters properly.
So if they do come up, and you prevent what you can, and then
I think there is an issue, though. I want to push it because if Hubert had not been at Clerica, and if he had not found Deb and she did not have a process or develop one, I doubt that the original group of people would have been as successful as it was. So there needs to be the input of expertise, structure, or whatever, to some degree. This is not an amateur sport, you know. We all do it in a sense. We try to make relationships, but what I've learned through time that there's a science to relationships, like there's a science to teaching. And if you don't learn that, you won't be as good a teacher or a good relator. So I don't know. I mean, there's a balance somewhere where that type of commitment and expertise is fundamental.
There's another company you might want to look at. Pasco has an amazing community of practice program. It's totally face-to-face. It's organized around the various types of products and services they provide. It's resourced with librarians who are information brokers to the groups. And it's a very interesting model. There's lots of models for how communities work right within your regions. You don't have to go very far to find them that have some structural programs around them too. Farm Credit Canada has incredible communities that come together, again, sometimes around crisis, like the BSE was a huge focus for them. There's lots of models to look at that are very close to home that you might want to just go and talk to them about.
It's also important, I think, though, to have input from people who have reviewed those models. I mean, I found what you had to say and what Olav had to say with regard to actual experience or data to be crucial. I don't think this is just play at it. I think there needs to be more than that. So with respecting, I respect your energy. I respect that you'll go out and do certain things. But if we want this to happen broadly and happen well, I think there needs to be a bit more input to it than just let it happen. So it needs to emerge, but it needs to be resourced. So we're not saying we can force its emergence, but I think there needs to be some bringing of knowledge into it or learnings into it.
Capitalize on that emergence.
Absolutely.
Okay. The sunlight and the water as the resources, as the knowledge to have built this community, but capitalize on the grounds there.
And we certainly have all kinds of tools. I'm not even worried about tools, to tell you the truth. I'm more worried about the social artists being able to paint their pictures. That to me is the crucial question that has emerged. Any other final words? I just don't want to cut anybody off. So I want to run on very quickly. We have only about 7 minutes, and we can continue this on email. But what are your goals? What's your key goal? It could be your goal being here, your goal generally in life, or that's one of the problems we have in that question. But my suggestion would be that we, what was the goal, the primary goal you have related to this type of meeting as a starting point? And I don't know, Roger, goal, one goal.
One goal, I guess, would be to see this as a seed, this meeting as a seed for sort of building that community.
So one goal was you have is this starts something.
Right.
Okay.
And I should clarify, I am not surprised that you've been married for so long.
Oh, sure. My wife is.
I just didn't hear the question.
My goal is to use whatever I've learned to close the gap between industry and academia and research.
So a goal would be closing the gap between industry and academia.
We're going to see where communities of practice may fit to stimulate further growth in our sector.
So a goal would be to move off and use that. Okay.
Yeah, I guess my goal is obviously, as you said, use the community of practice within my current position, because that's what we are obviously building, but also certainly explore and entertain the idea of this higher level of community of practice, because clearly my members, my technology and tech transfer needs to move out into these other regions and other expertise.
Okay, Paul?
I guess mine would be greater awareness of each of the groups and what they have to offer, so that there isn't duplicity or redundancy in the system, so that, you know.
Good. Interesting. Sure. Yours?
My goal is twofold.
Is the what?
Twofold.
Vote.
Very basic goal for what I do on a day-to-day basis is to build bio-business in Eastern Ontario. But I'd like to do that building on a community of practice. I think we already have that started, and I'd like to use that as a foundation to make that more provincial, because I think we can grow as a province by making the regions strong.
Okay.
I learned some interesting things with regard to leadership within communities of practice, and I hope to be able to apply some of that in terms of our RIN. So it's been very useful for me from a learning standpoint. The broader goal, obviously, is to build a world-class life science commercialization ecosystem in Ontario.
Wearing both hats, CEO Fusion and Angel at the NAO. My goal is to develop the community so that the angels or investing companies, the CEO Fusion companies, can leverage this community for resources that can make the company success. There's a hell of a lot of resources out there. Figure out what the pathways are to be able to leverage the money that's being put tomorrow's IAF, all these different programs. How do you leverage it?
So I guess my macro goal is wanting to ensure that I live in a community that has a robust economy and dynamic social and cultural environment and a healthy ecological environment, but more specific level, I guess, is I'm continually frustrated in trying to get a better understanding of the origins of this problem and how we solve it. Is what I hear about Toronto and Ontario generally. It's way too complex. We don't know how to navigate ourselves way through this environment. And I don't understand the basis of the problem, and I'd like to find some way to come to some solution.
So the goal is understanding the problem and then finding a solution.
I guess overall goal is trying to build a more efficient, effective commercialization system, ecosystem with the stakeholders, and I think using community of practice as a tool to achieve that goal.
I'll be truthful. The reason why I'm here is Bob Phillips is away on vacation, so I was...
So you escaped briefly.
Yeah, so I was actually sent here for to learn some of the tools to help with commercialization when OICR, now that it's set up as a research facility, it is going to be in charge of its own commercialization. So I wanted to learn some of the tools to help with commercialization. So in terms of what I've learned today, so set aside why I'm here for Bob, but I've learned a lot in terms of commercialization and practice. And more so, what I can see in terms of my role, I give funds to various projects, but I give funds to two very important projects. One of them is the Ontario Cancer Biomarker Network, and another one is developing, so I'm not going to mention its name. But one of the things that I've seen is, what I've been seeing happen is actually development of the community of practice. And with one key facilitator or one strong leader, a civic entrepreneur, a very key social artist, who understands how or what's so critical as to how to help or how to get biomarker utility in clinical trials so that eventually, and especially if we can do that well in Ontario, through best practice standards or SOPs, and everybody in Ontario doing biomarker studies the same way and collecting samples in the best way. One day, his dream is to have industry come from all over the world to come to Ontario to do clinical trials with companion biomarker studies. So seeing what's happening and validating, he is a social artist and he's actually developing a community of practice for people that are actually interested in biomarker utility in clinical trials. So one interesting great idea to use his or what's happening there as a pilot project as to the utility of community of practice and helping with commercialization and probably, bring it back to this group or to a group as a lessons learned as to how a COP can help with commercialization for the utility of Ontario.
Okay, I promised a hard stop at 12, and that's where we are just about right now. One quick question to everyone. Do you think it would be valuable to somehow put on a deeper education session on strictly community of practice kind of work, like really take this program and have a day dedicated to that alone? Do you think that would be valuable? Or alternatively, would there be some, regardless of the dissemination method, either coming in physically or on the web or whatever it might be, should there be an opportunity, maybe much more broad, for education about this to exist? I'll get an answer, yes or no. How many think yes? And how many think no? And the rest, so it's mostly yes. Okay. If you have any comments on that,
I guess my comment might be, I think there might be a value in pick a time, a 1-hour webinar to a much broader community, so that people like our bosses would listen into an hour. They don't want the day.
Okay, so there needs to be an executive.
Yeah, call it executive, but I think you could invite anyone, no matter what level they work, to just sort of give them a bit, so when we go home and say we're doing it for this reason and this reason, they could go, what are you talking about? But we say, well, we've got these, you've heard this little 1-hour webinar from these experts, our panel, and they get they get just the what executives like, the sound bite.
Okay, we have a vote on the source of the webinar. A quick one.
Keep in mind that actually using this concept and framework is a way to develop a common language.
Sure,
and so
absolutely.
more players that come in and have that common language, then it makes it easier for you to have the diversity be around the same
Okay,
thing.
quick comment.
And just instead of an information session, I would suggest maybe a really deeply facilitated workshop that we're actually working through a community or working through this
Okay.
community. Where
Okay.
we now have
So it might be this executive thing and then a real workshop.
who are the keys, who are the stakeholders,
Okay.
what's the domain, actually working through that model so we have a common platform to actually discuss that.
Okay. Okay, everybody happy with that? Sorry.
I think unless there's a reason to do it, because you're going to get implementation, I think why? It's a lot of time and effort, and if there's no uptake at the level where you're hitting a roadblock, then
So,
I think
yeah.
that it's for what reason?
Okay, so there has to be interest in this.
You've gotten the idea out, you've explained the concept to people, if people are going to use it, they're going to go away, they're going to take what they needed from it, and they're going to use it.
I'm thinking of all the people who haven't been here, including quite a few stakeholder groups that have not been present, like lawyers, for example.
But I think then the webinar...
Yeah, the webinar is definitely. Okay, we'll put that up, and if there are ideas, we'll get your actual suggestions on it, and they'll get fed through to MRI. Again, I don't want to cut anybody off, but I think that's it. First of all, thank you to you guys, to Etienne and Deb and Olaf. Your presentations are marvelous. And then the second thank you is to the people who really made it happen, to Shirley, who somehow got these guys. I don't know how she did it, but she got these guys. And, it was an amazing activity on her part. We almost crashed this thing, but she was the pilot in command that made it fly instead of hitting the ground. So, Shirley, thank you very much. To Roger, who, from MRI's vantage point, I would not have gone through. I would have stopped 20 times. You know that. I got totally frustrated along the way, which wasn't difficult. He kept it going. He kept it pushing, and somehow made it happen. Thank you very much for your discipline in that. And finally, we'll do the Russian thing. We vote for everybody who contributed, not only the poor suckers who aren't here today, but to all of you, thank you very much.